The brass bell above the pawnshop door jingled as Faith Forrester stepped inside, clutching her late husband's hat to her chest like it contained the last remnants of his soul. It had been 3 months since the influenza had taken him, and each day without him felt like walking through quicksand, progress measured in inches, grief in miles. Dust motes danced in the shafts of afternoon light that streamed through the grimy windows of Everett's Mercantile and Lone in Coyote Springs, Arizona territory. The year was 1882, and the small mining town was struggling through a drought that had left everyone counting pennies and pawning treasures. "Afternoon, Mrs. Forrester," said Walter Everett, the elderly proprietor, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. "What brings you in today?" Faith placed the wide-brimmed Stetson on the counter with trembling hands. It was a fine hat, barely worn. Daniel had saved for months to buy it just before they'd married. He'd only had it for 2 years before the fever took him. "I need money for seed," she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "The ranch won't plant itself." Walter examined the hat with careful hands. "Fine piece. Your Daniel had good taste." He looked up at Faith, pity creasing the corners of his eyes. "I can give you $8. "It cost 15 new," she protested, though her heart wasn't in the haggling. She needed the money more than she needed the memories that came with the hat, memories of Daniel tipping it to her each morning, of the sweat stains forming along the band during harvest, of how it had hung on the peg by their door every night. "Times are hard, Mrs. Forrester. 8 is the best I can do." A shadow fell across the counter as the shop door opened again. Faith didn't turn, keeping her eyes on the hat, tracing the small stitching along the brim where Daniel had repaired a tear. "Mrs. Forrester needs more than 8, came a deep voice from behind her. Faith turned to find Ethan Lawson filling the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking much of the afternoon light. He was tall and lean, sun-browned and trail-worn, with eyes the color of a summer sky. He'd arrived in Coyote Springs 6 months ago, working as a ranch hand for the Hendersons before buying his own small spread just north of the Forrester place. "This isn't your business, Lawson," Walter said, narrowing his eyes. "I'm making it my business." Ethan stepped forward, removing his own hat, a dusty, well-worn thing that had seen many miles. "What's a fair price, Mrs. Forrester?" Faith straightened her spine. $15 would be fair. 15, Walter protested. "I'd never sell it for that." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out several bills. "I'll give you 15 for it." He placed the money on the counter, his eyes never leaving Faith's face. "Now see here," Walter began. "It's done," Ethan said, cutting him off. He picked up Daniel's hat and handed it back to Faith along with the money. "This belongs with you, Mrs. Forrester." Faith stared at the hat and money in her hands, confusion and pride warring within her. "I don't take charity, Mr. Lawson." "It's not charity. It's a loan. You'll pay me back when your crops come in." His voice softened. "I know what it's like to lose something that can't be replaced." Something in his tone made Faith look up, really look at him. There was understanding in his eyes, and a depth of feeling that caught her off guard. "Thank you," she managed to say, clutching the hat close again. "I'll pay you back. Every cent." "I know you will." Ethan nodded, replacing his own hat on his head. "Can I walk you home, Mrs. Forrester?" Faith hesitated, then nodded. It was a mile back to her small ranch, and the company would be welcome. She hadn't realized how lonely she'd been until someone offered to walk beside her. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street. Faith walked beside Ethan, conscious of the curious glances from townsfolk. A widow and a bachelor walking together was sure to start tongues wagging. "You didn't have to do that," she said as they passed the general store. "No," Ethan agreed, "but I wanted to." He glanced at the hat in her hands. He must have been a good man. He was. Faith's throat tightened. We were only married 2 years when the influenza took him. Not enough time. Never is, Ethan said quietly. They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds the crunch of their boots on the hard-packed dirt and the distant lowing of cattle being driven to pasture. You said you know what it's like, Faith finally said. To lose something that can't be replaced. Ethan's jaw tightened. My wife and son. 5 years ago, fire took our home in Kansas. I was out checking fence lines. His voice was flat, but Faith could hear the pain beneath it. By the time I got back, there was nothing left to save. Faith's steps faltered. I'm so sorry. Ethan nodded, accepting her sympathy without comment. After that, I couldn't stay, so I started drifting. Worked my way west, ranch to ranch. He looked out at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Never thought I'd stop moving until I saw this land. They crested a small rise, and Faith's ranch came into view, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, 50 acres of land that had been her and Daniel's dream. Now it was just hers, a weight she wasn't sure she could carry alone. Why did you stop here? She asked. Ethan was quiet for so long that Faith thought he might not answer. Then he said, felt like I could breathe here. First time in 5 years. Faith understood that feeling. Despite her grief, there was something about this land that soothed the soul. As they approached her cabin, Faith noticed that her front step had been repaired, a job she'd been putting off since Daniel died. Did you fix my step? She asked, surprised. Ethan shrugged. Noticed it needed doing when I rode past last week. Wood was rotting out. Thank you, Faith said, genuinely touched. Small kindnesses meant everything when you were alone. They reached her door, and Faith turned to face him. Would you like to come in for coffee? Ethan shook his head. Another time, maybe. Got to get back and check on my stock before dark. He tipped his hat to her. Good evening, Mrs. Forrester. Faith, she said impulsively. My name is Faith. A small smile touched his lips. Faith, he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. I'm Ethan. She watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun, and felt something stir in her heart that she thought had died with Daniel. It frightened her, that feeling, and she quickly turned away, shutting her door firmly behind her. Inside, Faith placed Daniel's hat on its peg by the door, where it had hung every night of their marriage. The cabin felt emptier than it had that morning, though nothing had changed except her. She lit the lamp and counted out the money Ethan had given her. $15 enough for seed and maybe a little extra for supplies. She would pay him back, she vowed. She wouldn't be beholden to any man, no matter how kind his eyes or gentle his manner. The next morning dawned clear and cool, promising another dry day in a season that desperately needed rain. Faith rose with the sun, as she had every day since Daniel died, and set about her chores. The ranch was too much for one person, especially a woman alone, but she was determined to make it work. By mid-morning, she had fed the animals, collected eggs from the henhouse, and was working in her small kitchen garden when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw Ethan Lawson riding toward her cabin, leading a second horse laden with burlap sacks. Morning, Faith, he called as he dismounted. Brought you that seed you were needing. Faith wiped her hands on her apron, conscious of the dirt under her fingernails and the sweat dampening her hair. You didn't have to do that. Was heading to town anyway, Ethan said, though they both knew the mercantile was in the opposite direction from his ranch. Figured I'd save you the trip. He began unloading the sacks from the packhorse, carrying them to her storage shed without asking where they should go. Faith followed, watching as he stacked them neatly against the wall. How much do I owe you? she asked when he finished. Consider it part of the loan, Ethan said. You can pay me back all at once when your crops come in. Faith frowned. I don't like being in debt. Neither do I, Ethan agreed. But sometimes we need help. No shame in that. He looked around the shed, noting the tools hanging on the wall. Planning to plant today? Faith nodded. The west field. It's small enough that I can manage it alone. Not alone, Ethan said simply. I'll help. Before she could protest, he was rolling up his sleeves and reaching for the plow. Got your team hitched up? Faith found herself following him out of the shed, caught between pride and practicality. Mr. Lawson, Ethan, I can't ask you to do this. You didn't ask. I offered. He glanced at her over his shoulder. Less talking. More working if we want to get that field planted before sundown. And so they worked, side by side under the unforgiving Arizona sun. Ethan handled the plow, guiding the team of horses with practiced ease, turning the soil in neat, straight furrows. Faith followed behind, dropping seeds at measured intervals, her back aching from bending. They spoke little, saving their breath for the work, but there was a comfort in the shared labor that Faith hadn't expected. By midday, they had completed half the field, and Faith called a halt for dinner. Not much to offer, she apologized as she set out bread, cheese, and cold ham on the kitchen table. Wasn't expecting company. Looks like a feast to me, Ethan said, washing his hands at the pump outside before joining her. He ate with the appetite of a man who'd been working hard, appreciating each bite without pretense. Faith found herself studying him across the table the way the sun had weathered his face, the small scar near his right eye, the strength in his hands as he cut his bread. He was different from Daniel, who had been shorter and fairer, with quick movements and a ready laugh. Ethan was steady, deliberate, his emotions held close. Tell me about your wife, she said suddenly. Ethan's hand stilled for a moment, then continued cutting his cheese. Her name was Sarah. She had red hair and a temper to match. A small smile touched his lips. Stubborn as the day is long. Never backed down from anything. And your son, James. He was 3. Ethan's voice softened. Had his mother's hair and my eyes. Loved horses. Could name everyone in our stable. Faith could see them in her mind, this red-haired woman and her little boy, the family Ethan had lost. You must miss them terribly. Every day, Ethan said. But it gets. Not easier. Different. He looked up at her. You find a way to carry it so it doesn't crush you. Faith nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. I keep thinking I'll turn around and Daniel will be there, standing in the doorway with that half-smile of his. I still reach for Sarah in the night, Ethan admitted quietly. 5 years, and I still expect her to be there. Their eyes met across the table, and Faith felt a connection she hadn't expected, the shared understanding of what it meant to love and lose. It wasn't romantic, this feeling, but it was intimate in a way that made her both comfortable and uneasy. We should get back to work, she said, breaking the moment. Still have half a field to plant. They worked through the afternoon, and by the time the sun was setting, the entire field was planted. Faith stood at the edge, looking out over the turned earth, knowing that in a few weeks, green shoots would begin to appear. Thank you, she said, turning to Ethan. I couldn't have done this alone. You would have found a way, he said, his confidence in her evident. You're stronger than you think, Faith Forrester. No one had told her she was strong since Daniel died. Everyone in town looked at her with pity, seeing only a widow struggling to hold onto her husband's dream. But Ethan saw her not as Daniel's widow, but as a woman in her own right. Will you stay for supper? She asked. This time he accepted. Over the next few weeks, Ethan came by regularly, always with some excuse, a tool he thought she might need, news from town, an offer to help with some heavy chore. Faith found herself looking forward to his visits, planning her days around them, though she tried not to admit this even to herself. One evening in early May, a month after the day in the pawnshop, Ethan arrived as Faith was finishing her evening chores. He carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Brought you something," he said, offering it to her as they sat on her front porch. Faith unwrapped the package to find a small book of poetry, Tennyson, her favorite. "How did you know?" "You mentioned it once," Ethan said, "when we were fixing the chicken coop. Said your father used to read Tennyson to you." The fact that he had remembered such a small detail touched Faith deeply. "Thank you," she said, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "It's been years since I had a new book." They sat in comfortable silence as the day faded into twilight. Crickets began their evening chorus, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "I should be going," Ethan said eventually, though he made no move to stand. "Yes," Faith agreed, equally still. After a moment, Ethan turned to her. "Faith, he stopped, seeming to struggle for words, which was unusual for a man who generally said exactly what he meant. "I've been thinking about you. A lot." Faith's heart quickened. "Have you?" "Yes." Ethan looked out at the darkening land, then back to her. "I know it's too soon. For both of us, maybe. But I find myself wanting to see you every day." Faith swallowed hard. "I look for you," she admitted. "Every afternoon. I watch the road." Ethan's expression softened. "I don't want to replace what you had with Daniel, or what I had with Sarah. That wouldn't be right or possible." "No," Faith agreed. "But perhaps there's room for something new, something different." Ethan reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. It was the first time he had touched her deliberately, not in the course of work or by accident, and Faith felt the contact like a current running through her. "I'd like to court you properly," he said. "If you're willing." Faith looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face, earnest in the fading light. "I think I would like that very much," she said. The town of Coyote Springs buzzed with gossip when Ethan Lawson began officially courting Faith Forrester. Some thought it was too soon after Daniel's death. Others said it was practical for a widow alone. Faith paid them no mind. For the first time since losing Daniel, she felt as if she were moving forward rather than just surviving. Ethan was different from Daniel in many ways. Where Daniel had been quick to laugh and speak, Ethan was thoughtful and measured. Daniel had been a dreamer, full of grand plans. Ethan was practical, focused on what could be done today. But both men shared a fundamental kindness and integrity that had drawn Faith to them. As spring turned to summer, Faith's crops grew tall and green, promising a good harvest. She and Ethan fell into a comfortable rhythm, working together on both their properties, sharing meals, and gradually learning each other's habits and histories. One hot July evening, they sat on Faith's porch, drinking lemonade and watching the sun set. Faith had just finished telling Ethan about her childhood in Missouri, about the flood that had prompted her parents to move west when she was 12. "I hated leaving at first," she said. "But then I fell in love with the open sky out here. The way you can see forever." Ethan nodded, understanding. "It's different from Kansas. Harsher in some ways, but there's a beauty to it that gets under your skin." Faith looked at him, at the profile she had come to know so well over the past months. "Ethan, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "That day in the pawn shop. Why did you do it?" "Buy back Daniel's hat for me?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering. "I saw your face when you put that hat on the counter, like you were tearing out a piece of your heart." He paused. "After Sarah and James died, I had nothing left of them. The fire took everything, every photograph, every toy, every piece of clothing. All I had were memories, and some days those weren't enough. He turned to look at her. I couldn't let you lose something that mattered so much. Not if I could prevent it. Faith's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. No need for thanks between us. She caught his hand and held it against her face. I think I'm falling in love with you, Ethan Lawson. Ethan's breath caught. Faith, he said, her name a prayer on his lips. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and kissed her with infinite gentleness. It was different from Daniel's kisses, which had been passionate and impulsive. Ethan kissed her as if she were precious, as if he had all the time in the world to learn the shape of her lips, the taste of her. When they parted, Faith kept her eyes closed for a moment, savoring the feeling. When she opened them, Ethan was watching her with an expression of wonder. I love you, he said simply. Have since that first day, I think. It seems impossible, Faith said. To love again after losing so much. Not impossible, Ethan said. Just different. The heart has more room than we think. They were married in September, after the harvest was in. It was a small ceremony in the town church, with only a few friends attending. Faith wore a simple blue dress she had made herself, and Ethan wore a new shirt and his best trousers. After the ceremony, they rode back to Faith's ranch, their ranch now in Ethan's wagon. As they approached, Faith noticed something different about the cabin. The porch, she said, surprised. It's bigger. Ethan smiled. Thought we might like a place to sit together in the evenings. Watch the sunset. He had extended the porch across the entire front of the cabin and added a swing wide enough for two. It was a simple gift, but one that spoke volumes about the life he envisioned for them, quiet evenings together, watching the land they both loved. That night, as they prepared for bed in what was now their shared room, Faith noticed something that made her pause. On the peg by the door hung two hats, Daniel's fine Stetson, and beside it, Ethan's well-worn one. You hung your hat next to his, she said softly. Ethan came to stand behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Is that all right? Faith turned in his arms, looking up at him. It's perfect, she said. Daniel would approve, I think. Of you. Of us. I hope so, Ethan said seriously. I won't try to replace him, Faith. He'll always be part of you, part of this place. Just as Sarah and James will always be part of you, Faith said. We carry them with us, but we move forward together. Ethan kissed her then, deeply and with purpose, and Faith responded with all the love in her heart, love for the man she had lost and the man she had found, for the past that had shaped her and the future that stretched before them. Winter came early that year, bringing much-needed snow to the parched land. Faith and Ethan settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They had both learned the hard lessons of loss, which made them appreciate each day together all the more. On Christmas morning, Faith woke to find Ethan already up, stoking the fire in the stove. She watched him from the bed, admiring the broad line of his shoulders, the careful way he moved. Merry Christmas, she said, and he turned with a smile that still made her heart skip. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Lawson. He came to sit on the edge of the bed. I have something for you. He handed her a small wooden box, beautifully carved with wildflowers around the edges. Inside, nestled on a piece of velvet, was a locket. Oh, Ethan, Faith breathed, lifting it out. The locket was silver, engraved with delicate scrollwork. Open it, Ethan urged. Inside were two tiny portraits. On one side, a miniature painting of Daniel, copied from the photograph Faith kept in her Bible. On the other, a similar portrait of Ethan. How? Faith asked, tears filling her eyes. Mrs. Henderson's sister is an artist. She was visiting last month and agreed to paint them from the photographs. Ethan looked uncertain. I thought you might like to have Daniel's likeness to carry with you, and perhaps mine as well. Faith closed the locket and clutched it to her chest, overcome. That Ethan understood her well enough to know that she still needed Daniel's memory, that he was secure enough in their love to honor her first husband in this way. It was the most profound gift she could imagine. I love you, she said, reaching for him, more than I can say. Later, after they had exchanged gifts and shared a special breakfast, they sat together on the porch swing, wrapped in blankets against the cold, watching the snow fall on their land. Do you ever regret it? Faith asked. Settling here? With me? Ethan's arm tightened around her. Not for a single moment. You and this land, you've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? Hope, Ethan said simply. A future worth building. Faith rested her head on his shoulder, content in a way she hadn't thought possible after Daniel's death. Life had taken unexpected turns, bringing both unbearable loss and unexpected joy. She thought of the two hats hanging side by side in their cabin, symbols of the past and present, of endings and beginnings. I'm glad you bought back that hat, she said. Ethan kissed the top of her head. Best money I ever spent. Years passed, and the small ranch prospered under their joint care. Faith and Ethan worked side by side, through drought and flood, through good years and lean ones. In their third year of marriage, Faith gave birth to twins, a boy they named Daniel and a girl they called Sarah, honoring those they had loved and lost. The children grew strong and healthy, with Ethan's blue eyes and Faith's determined spirit. They learned early about the two hats that hung by the door, their father's well-worn one and the finer hat that had belonged to the first Daniel, as they called him. It seemed natural to them that their family included these beloved ghosts, these memories kept alive through stories and treasured objects. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Ethan took Faith to the porch swing after the children were asleep. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Happy anniversary, my love, he said, handing her a small package. Faith unwrapped it to find a beautiful leather-bound journal. It's lovely, she said, running her fingers over the smooth cover. I thought you might write our story, Ethan said, for the children, so they'll know how we found each other. Faith opened the journal, finding the first page already filled with Ethan's careful handwriting. It began with a hat and a broken heart. A widow tried to pawn her husband's hat. A cowboy bought it back and placed it beside his own. What started as an act of kindness became the greatest blessing of my life. This is our story, Faith, of loss and love, of endings that became beginnings, of two hearts that found room for more love than either thought possible. Faith looked up at him, her heart full. Our story, she agreed, still being written. Ethan took her hand, his touch as familiar now as her own heartbeat. Every day, he said. Together, they sat in companionable silence, watching the stars well overhead, thinking of the journey that had brought them to this moment, a journey that began with grief and a hat, and led to a love that neither had expected to find again. Inside their cabin, two hats hung side by side, just as they had for 10 years, a testament to the past they honored and the future they built together, one day at a time, under the vast Arizona sky.